A $23 piece of jewelry. A chance encounter in an upscale restaurant. And a secret that had been buried for 27 years. A secret that would bring a billionaire to her knees and transform a struggling waitress into an heiress. But the journey to justice would cost more than anyone could have imagined, and the truth would shake Manhattan's elite to its core. If you're ready for a story that will grip your heart and restore your faith in the power of truth, subscribe to Tales by Shaldra right now. You won't want to miss what happens next. The diamond pendant caught the light as Victoria Whitmore's trembling fingers reached toward it. "Where did you get this?" Her voice cracked, barely a whisper, the words catching in her throat as if they might shatter something fragile in the air between them. The young waitress froze, her tray still balanced on one hand, completely unprepared for what would happen next. She had served hundreds of wealthy patrons in this restaurant, had learned to be invisible, to anticipate needs before they were spoken. But nothing in her training had prepared her for this moment. In that upscale Manhattan restaurant, surrounded by the city's elite who barely glanced up from their truffle risotto and aged wine, a cheap necklace was about to unravel a mystery that had tormented one of America's wealthiest women for 27 years. The crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, casting prismatic light across white tablecloths and polished silverware, while outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city pulsed with its usual indifferent energy. Victoria Whitmore didn't do emotional displays. The 72-year-old CEO of Whitmore Cosmetics had built a beauty empire worth $4 billion through calculated decisions and an ice-cold demeanor that made grown men tremble in board meetings. Her perfectly styled silver hair, designer suit, and 3-carat diamond earrings spoke of old money and absolute control. She had buried a husband, outmaneuvered countless competitors, and never once let anyone see her cry. Business magazines called her the Ice Queen of Manhattan. Her competitors called her worse things, usually in private, usually with grudging respect. Until today. The waitress, whose name tag read Alicia, stood motionless as this powerful woman stared at the simple silver chain around her neck. The pendant was nothing special, just a small locket shaped like a heart with a tiny engraving on the back that read "Forever." Alicia had worn it every day for as long as she could remember. It was the only thing she had from her past, the only connection to a life before foster homes and group facilities. She had clutched it during panic attacks in the middle of the night. She had touched it for luck before job interviews. She had wondered, countless times, who had given it to her and why they had left her behind. "I need to take your order," Alicia said quietly, trying to keep her voice steady. She had worked at Dominique's for 6 months, saving every penny for nursing school. This job was everything to her. The tips were good, the schedule was flexible, and she was finally getting ahead after years of barely surviving. She couldn't afford to lose it because some rich lady had fixated on her jewelry. But Victoria wasn't listening. Her eyes remained locked on that necklace, her face draining of color until the expensive makeup couldn't hide her pallor. The other diners at nearby tables had started to notice. Whispers rippled through the restaurant like a stone dropped in still water. Victoria Whitmore was a fixture in Manhattan society. Her face graced the covers of Forbes and Fortune. People recognized her, and right now, she looked like she had seen a ghost. "Please," Victoria said, her voice breaking in a way that sent chills down Alicia's spine. "Please tell me where you got that necklace." Alicia shifted uncomfortably, the weight of the tray suddenly unbearable. Her manager, David, was already heading their way, his expression tight with concern. David ran Dominique's with military precision. He had made it clear when he hired Alicia that wealthy clients were never to be disturbed or questioned. They were to be served with silent efficiency and grateful smiles. Any deviation from this protocol meant immediate termination. He had fired 3 people in the 6 months Alicia had worked there, each time without warning or second chances. "Is everything all right, Mrs. Whitmore?" David asked smoothly, inserting himself between the billionaire and his waitress. "I apologize if there has been any inconvenience." His hand gestured subtly for Alicia to step back, to disappear into the kitchen where she belonged. "I need to speak with her," Victoria said, ignoring David entirely, her eyes never leaving the necklace. "Alone. Please." The entire restaurant had gone quiet now. Forks hung suspended over plates of seared duck and lobster thermidor. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even the sommelier paused in his rounds, a bottle of 1982 Chateau Lafite Rothschild forgotten in his hands. Victoria Whitmore, known throughout New York for her composure and dignity, was crying. Actual tears streamed down her carefully made-up face, cutting tracks through her foundation, smudging the mascara that probably cost more than Alicia's monthly rent. Alicia's heart pounded. She had no idea what was happening. The necklace had been with her since she was found as an infant, abandoned in a hospital bathroom in Newark. It was the only clue to her identity, the only thing whoever left her had bothered to include. For 27 years, it had hung around her neck, a constant reminder that someone, somewhere, hadn't wanted her. She had created elaborate fantasies as a child. Maybe her mother was a princess in hiding, maybe she had been stolen by evil relatives, maybe there was some tragic reason she had been left behind. But as she grew older, the fantasies faded, replaced by the bitter understanding that she had simply been unwanted. "Mrs. Whitmore, perhaps we should move this conversation to my office," David suggested, his tone professional but firm. The last thing he needed was a scene. Several diners were already recording on their phones, the blue light of screens held up like modern-day torches. This would be on social media within minutes, on gossip blogs within the hour. Victoria stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the polished floor with a sound that made everyone wince. She reached into her purse, a Hermes Birkin that cost more than most cars, and pulled out a stack of $100 bills, tossing them onto the table without counting. There had to be at least $3,000 there, scattered across her untouched meal. "Keep the change," she said to David, her voice steadier now, hardening with the determination that had built an empire. Then she turned to Alicia, and her expression softened again, became vulnerable in a way that seemed almost painful. "Please. I'm begging you. 5 minutes of your time. That's all I ask." Alicia looked at her manager. David's jaw was tight, his eyes calculating. He was clearly weighing the potential disaster of refusing Victoria Whitmore against the chaos of indulging this bizarre request. After a long moment, he nodded curtly. 5 minutes. In the back office." The walk through the restaurant felt like miles. Every eye followed them. Alicia could hear the whispers, feel the weight of judgment and curiosity pressing down on her shoulders. She was just a waitress, nobody special, nobody important. Victoria Whitmore was royalty in this world. Whatever this was about, it couldn't be good for her. Nothing good ever came from mixing with people this far above her station. The office was small and cramped, dominated by a desk covered in invoices and reservation books. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead, harsh after the ambient glow of the dining room. Victoria closed the door behind them and turned to face Alicia. Her hands were shaking, her carefully maintained composure cracking like ice under pressure. "That necklace," Victoria began, her voice thick with emotion. "I gave it to my daughter 27 years ago. I had it specially made for her 20th birthday. The engraving, forever, that was our promise to each other. Forever and always, no matter what." The words hung in the air like smoke. Alicia felt the room tilt slightly, felt the floor become uncertain beneath her feet. "I don't understand," she whispered. Victoria reached into her purse again, this time pulling out her phone. With trembling fingers, she scrolled through her photos until she found what she was looking for. She held the screen toward Alicia. The photo showed a young woman, maybe early 20s, with long dark hair and bright eyes that sparkled with joy and mischief. She was laughing at something off camera, her hand resting on a very pregnant belly. And around her neck hung a necklace identical to the one Alicia wore, the same heart-shaped locket, the same delicate chain, the same engraving that caught the light. Her name was Rachel, Victoria said softly. "My daughter. My only child. My entire world." Alicia stared at the photo, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. The woman did look familiar, or maybe she was just seeing what she wanted to see. Maybe this was all some elaborate mistake, some cosmic coincidence that would unravel as quickly as it had formed. "What happened to her?" Alicia asked, though part of her already knew the answer. Nobody spoke about their child in the past tense unless something terrible had happened. Victoria's face crumpled, years of carefully maintained control dissolving in an instant. "She died in childbirth. 27 years ago," at a hospital in Newark. There were complications, a placental abruption. They couldn't stop the bleeding. The baby survived, but Rachel didn't make it. She held on just long enough to know her child was alive, and then she paused, struggling to continue, her breath coming in short gasps. I was traveling in Europe when it happened. We had argued before I left. She wanted to keep the baby, wanted to be a single mother, and I had been so stupid, so cruel. I told her she was throwing her life away. I was on a flight back when she went into labor. By the time I landed, she was already gone. Victoria's voice broke completely now, sobs racking her body. By the time I got to the hospital, they told me the baby had been adopted. The agency said it was a private adoption, already finalized. Rachel had apparently made arrangements before she died, or so they claimed. I tried everything. Hired the best investigators, the most expensive lawyers. I offered rewards, I threatened lawsuits. But the trail went cold. Every lead turned into a dead end. The adoption agency closed down within a year. The lawyer who handled it died in a car accident. It was like someone had deliberately erased every trace of my grandchild. The room felt too small suddenly. Alicia couldn't breathe. The fluorescent light seemed too bright, the walls too close. You're saying, she started, but couldn't finish the sentence. I'm saying that necklace belonged to my daughter, Victoria interrupted, her voice gaining strength through the tears. And the only person who should have it is her child. My grandchild. You. Alicia's legs gave out. She sank into the chair behind her, her mind racing, trying to make sense of what she was hearing. It wasn't possible. Things like this didn't happen in real life. She was nobody, just another kid the system had failed, bouncing from foster home to foster home until she aged out at 18. She was the girl nobody wanted, the one who never got adopted while younger, cuter children found families. I was never adopted, Alicia said finally, her voice barely audible. I grew up in foster care. They found me in a hospital bathroom. Someone had left me there with just that necklace and a blanket. I was there for hours before a janitor heard me crying. They said it was a miracle I survived. The bathroom was cold, and I was hypothermic by the time they found me. If the janitor had finished his shift and gone home. Victoria's expression shifted from hope to horror. A bathroom? You were found in a bathroom? Newark General, Alicia confirmed. 27 years ago. March 15th. They told me later that I was maybe 6 hours old when they found me. The umbilical cord had been tied off professionally, but I hadn't been cleaned up properly. There was no note, no explanation. Just me and the necklace and a hospital blanket. Victoria pressed a hand to her mouth, her eyes wide with dawning understanding. That's the hospital where Rachel died. March 15th was the day she gave birth. Oh God. Oh my God. The pieces were falling into place, but the picture they formed was too terrible to contemplate. Alicia had spent her entire life wondering why she had been abandoned. She had created stories in her head, imagining scenarios where her mother had no choice, where circumstances had forced an impossible decision. She had forgiven her anonymous mother 1,000 times, convinced herself that somewhere out there, someone had made the hardest choice possible out of love. But this? This was something else entirely. Someone took you, Victoria whispered, the realization dawning in her eyes with terrible clarity. Someone at that hospital took you from the maternity ward and left you in that bathroom. They stole you from me. They let me believe you had been adopted, that you were safe and loved somewhere. But all that time, you were alone, suffering, and I had no idea. Alicia felt tears streaming down her own face now, hot and uncontrollable. Why would someone do that? What kind of person would steal a baby and leave her to die? Because you were worth millions, Victoria said bitterly, her grief transforming into rage right before Alicia's eyes. As my sole heir, you would inherit everything. Rachel wasn't married. The father was never in the picture, he was just some boy she met at college, someone who disappeared the moment she told him she was pregnant. That meant you were my only grandchild, my only living family. Someone must have thought they could profit from making you disappear. If I had no heir, if I died without direct descendants, my business partners would have benefited enormously. The board would have seized control. There were people who stood to gain billions from your disappearance. The enormity of it crashed over Alicia like a wave, threatening to drown her. She had grown up with nothing, shuffled between homes where nobody really wanted her, where she was just another check from the state. She had worn thrift store clothes and eaten donated food. She had worked 3 jobs to save enough for community college. She had been told she was lucky to have a roof over her head, that she should be grateful for the bare minimum. She had believed she was worthless, disposable, forgotten. And all that time, she had a grandmother. A family. A fortune that should have been hers. A life that had been stolen from her before she even had a chance to know it existed. "We need proof," Alicia said, forcing herself to think rationally through the chaos of emotions. "We can't just assume based on a necklace. There could be an explanation. Maybe someone found the necklace and gave it to whoever left me. Maybe." "DNA test," Victoria interrupted, nodding vigorously. "We can do it right now. I have a lab on retainer, the best in the country. They can rush the results. We'll know for certain within hours." "But even if it's true," Alicia continued, her voice breaking, "how do we find out who did this? It's been 27 years. People are dead, records are destroyed, memories fade. How do we prove what happened?" Victoria's expression hardened. The grief in her eyes transformed into something else, something cold and determined and utterly ruthless. It was the expression that had built a billion-dollar empire, that had destroyed competitors and conquered markets. It was the Ice Queen of Manhattan, and she had a target now. "We find them," she said simply, with absolute certainty. "And we make them pay for every single day they stole from us." What neither woman knew yet was that the person responsible was closer than they could have imagined, standing just outside the office door with his ear pressed to the wood. David, the manager who had been listening to every word, felt a bead of sweat roll down his spine despite the air conditioning. His heart hammered in his chest, each beat like a drum announcing his doom. 27 years ago, he had been a nurse at Newark General, a young man fresh out of school with big dreams and even bigger debts. A nurse with gambling debts that had spiraled out of control, debts to people who didn't accept excuses or extensions. A nurse who had been approached by someone who promised him $50,000 to make a baby disappear, no questions asked, no details provided. He had told himself it would be fine. The baby would be found. Someone would adopt her. He would pay off his debts and never gamble again. It was just one moment, one choice, one compromise that would solve all his problems. But things hadn't gone according to plan. The baby had been in that bathroom for hours before someone found her. He had checked the news obsessively for weeks, terrified he would see a headline about an infant found dead. When he learned she had survived, he had told himself it was a sign, that everything had worked out, that he could move on. By then, he had already fled New Jersey, started over in New York, and tried to forget what he had done. He had built a new life, a respectable life. He had worked his way up from busboy to manager. He had stayed away from casinos and betting parlors. He had convinced himself that he was a good person who had made one terrible mistake. And now, that baby was serving tables in his restaurant. And her grandmother, one of the most powerful women in America, was about to uncover everything. His new life, his respectable position, his careful reconstruction of himself, it was all about to come crashing down. David's hands shook as he pulled out his phone. He needed to call someone. He needed help. But who could help him now? The woman he had been working for, the one who had orchestrated the entire thing and handed him that envelope of cash, was dead. Evelyn Harper had been killed in a car accident 15 years ago, her Mercedes crashing through a guardrail on the Pacific Coast Highway. The investigation had ruled it an accident. She had been drinking, driving too fast, taking unnecessary risks as usual. And she had taken all the details to her grave, or so David had thought. Except she hadn't. Because sitting in a safe deposit box in a Manhattan bank was a letter. A letter Evelyn had insisted he keep as insurance, as protection for both of them. A letter that detailed everything, the plan, the payment, the names of everyone involved, signed and notarized with copies sent to her lawyer to be opened in the event of her death or arrest. At the time, he had thought it protected him, that it proved he was just a small cog in a larger machine. Now he realized it was his death sentence. It was evidence of conspiracy, of kidnapping, of endangering a child. It was a roadmap to his destruction. Inside the office, Victoria was already making calls. Her voice carried through the thin door, sharp, commanding, brooking no argument. Within an hour, a private DNA testing service had arrived at the restaurant, brought in through the service entrance to avoid the growing crowd of paparazzi gathering outside. Within 3 hours, they had preliminary results that showed a familial match. Within 6 hours, it was confirmed with 99.9% certainty. Alicia Rodriguez was actually Alicia Whitmore. The missing heir. The stolen baby. The granddaughter who had been presumed lost forever. The news broke like a thunderstorm over the city. By morning, every major outlet was running the story, each with increasingly sensational headlines. Billionaire's missing heir found working as waitress. DNA test confirms restaurant worker is Whitmore fortune heir. 27 years later, the mystery of the stolen baby solved. The restaurant was mobbed with reporters. Alicia's photo was everywhere, her social media accounts overflowing with messages from strangers offering congratulations, condolences, and requests for money. But Victoria wasn't interested in the media circus. She was interested in justice. She hired the best investigators money could buy, former FBI agents, private detectives with connections in every agency, forensic accountants who could find money hidden in the deepest offshore accounts. She demanded the hospital turn over every record from 27 years ago, threatening lawsuits and public exposure if they resisted. She subpoenaed bank records, employment files, security footage that should have been destroyed years ago but somehow still existed in a forgotten archive in a storage facility in New Jersey. And slowly, methodically, like an archaeologist brushing away centuries of dust to reveal ancient bones, the truth emerged. It took 3 weeks to connect all the dots. The nurse who had been on duty that night, David Morrison, who had left Newark General abruptly and moved to New York, who had no nursing experience on his resume after 1998. The $50,000 deposit into an account that hadn't been touched in years, sitting in a savings account gathering interest like evidence of a crime preserved in amber. The gambling debts to a loan shark in Atlantic City who still had records because he never threw anything away. The mysterious woman who had paid for everything, whose identity remained hidden behind shell companies and deceased lawyers until the investigators peeled back enough layers to find her name, Evelyn Harper. Victoria's former business partner. The woman who had tried to stage a hostile takeover of Whitmore Cosmetics in the aftermath of Rachel's death. The woman who had nearly succeeded in destroying everything Victoria had built. David tried to run. He withdrew what little savings he had, bought a ticket to Costa Rica, and made it as far as JFK Airport before Victoria's security team intercepted him. Not violently, just efficiently. A hand on his elbow as he waited in the security line. A quiet conversation. A car waiting to take him somewhere he couldn't escape. The woman sat across from him in the back of the limousine, her face a mask of controlled rage that was somehow more terrifying than screaming or threats. "I want names," Victoria said quietly, her voice like ice. Everyone involved. Every person who knew. Every person who helped. Every person who stayed silent. You tell me everything, and maybe, I'll recommend leniency when this goes to trial. You stay silent, and I will dedicate the rest of my life to making yours a living hell. I will destroy you, your family, anyone who ever cared about you. I will make you wish you had never been born. Do you understand me? David broke. He told her everything. About the woman who had approached him, Evelyn Harper, who had been Victoria's business partner at the time and second largest shareholder in Whitmore Cosmetics. About how Evelyn had been systematically stealing from the company and needed Victoria distracted, broken, unable to pay attention to the business. About how she had hoped that making the baby disappear would destroy Victoria completely, leaving Evelyn free to take over Whitmore Cosmetics and cover her embezzlement. About the other people who had been involved, an accountant who had helped hide the payments, a lawyer who had falsified adoption records, a social worker who had been paid to lose files, a hospital administrator who had looked the other way. It had almost worked. Victoria had spent years drowning in grief, barely able to function. She had thrown herself into work as a way to escape the pain, but her judgment had been impaired. The company had suffered. Stock prices had plummeted. Shareholders had panicked. Evelyn had come within inches of a hostile takeover, her stolen money funding a campaign to convince the board that Victoria was unfit to lead. But Victoria had survived. She had rebuilt. She had fought back with everything she had, eventually forcing Evelyn out of the company entirely. And Evelyn had died in a car accident 15 years ago, taking her secrets with her. Except now, those secrets were spilling out like poison from a broken vessel. And with them came evidence of other crimes. Embezzlement. Fraud. Conspiracy. Money laundering. The destruction of evidence. The falsification of legal documents. Evelyn might be dead, but she had accomplices. People who were still alive. People who had profited from stolen money and a stolen child. People who had lived comfortable lives built on the suffering of an innocent baby and her grieving grandmother. Victoria went after them all with the single-minded determination that had built her empire. She didn't just want financial restitution. She wanted criminal prosecution. She wanted prison sentences. She wanted everyone who had played even a small role in stealing her grandchild to face consequences. She wanted the world to know what they had done. The district attorney initially resisted. The crimes were old, some beyond the statute of limitations. Evidence was spotty, witnesses were dead or had failing memories, and the central figure, Evelyn Harper, couldn't be prosecuted because she was already dead. It seemed like a waste of resources, a case that would generate publicity but few convictions. But Victoria Whitmore didn't accept no for an answer. She used every ounce of her wealth and influence. She hired the best lawyers in the country. She generated media pressure, giving interviews that highlighted every detail of the case, making it impossible for the public to look away. She lobbied politicians, called in favors, made strategic donations. She made it impossible for the district attorney to ignore this case without facing public outrage and accusations of protecting the wealthy and powerful. The trial lasted 6 months and dominated headlines throughout. David testified against his former accomplices in exchange for a reduced sentence, his voice shaking as he described his role in the crime. He got 15 years. The accountant who had helped Evelyn hide the money got 12. The lawyer who had falsified adoption records got 10. The social worker who had lost files got 8. 3 other people were convicted of conspiracy and fraud, receiving sentences ranging from 5 to 7 years. The hospital paid a settlement of $20 million for their negligent oversight that had allowed a baby to be stolen from their maternity ward. The settlement funded new security protocols at hospitals across the country, including electronic tracking bracelets for all newborns and enhanced background checks for all staff with access to maternity wards. And every person who had known something but said nothing, nurses who had noticed irregularities, administrators who had ignored complaints, board members who had looked the other way, faced professional consequences that destroyed their careers. Licenses revoked, reputations shattered, comfortable retirements transformed into public disgrace. But the legal victories, satisfying as they were, couldn't erase 27 years of stolen time. They couldn't give Alicia back the childhood she should have had. They couldn't undo the trauma of foster care, the loneliness, the constant feeling that she didn't belong anywhere, that she was fundamentally unlovable. They couldn't erase the memories of foster fathers who drank too much, foster mothers who resented every penny spent on her care, other kids who bullied her for having nothing and being nobody. Victoria knew this. So she focused on what she could control, the future. She brought Alicia into her home, a penthouse overlooking Central Park that felt more like a museum than a home, filled with art and antiques and evidence of a life lived alone. She brought her into her family, though family now consisted of just the 2 of them, bound by blood and loss and an unbreakable determination to make something good from something terrible. She brought her into her life, not as a replacement for Rachel, but as her own person with her own dreams and desires. She paid for Alicia to finish her nursing degree at Columbia University, the best nursing program in the city. She introduced her to the company, giving her tours of the labs where cosmetics were developed, the manufacturing facilities where they were produced, the marketing departments where campaigns were born. But she did it without pressure to take over, without expectations that Alicia would follow in her footsteps, with genuine curiosity about what Alicia wanted for herself. And Alicia, for the first time in her life, had choices. Real choices, not the false choices of poverty where every option led to struggle. She could pursue nursing, the career she had dreamed of since childhood. She could work in the family business, learning to run an empire. She could travel, see the world she had only glimpsed in magazines and on screens. She could do anything, be anyone, go anywhere. She chose to start a foundation. The Rachel Whitmore Foundation, named after the mother she never knew, the woman whose death had set all of this in motion. Its mission was simple, direct, and deeply personal: reform the foster care system. Ensure no child fell through the cracks the way Alicia had. Provide resources, support, and oversight. Fight for every forgotten child. Victoria funded it with $50 million to start, calling it an investment in the future. Within a year, they had placed over 300 children in permanent homes, matching them with families who had passed rigorous screening and who received ongoing support. Within 2 years, they had lobbied successfully for legislation that tightened hospital security protocols and created better tracking systems for newborns, making it nearly impossible for another baby to be stolen the way Alicia had been. 6 months after the trial ended, Alicia stood at a podium in front of a packed auditorium at the Plaza Hotel. The room was filled with politicians, philanthropists, journalists, and advocates. She wore a business suit that Victoria had helped her pick out, charcoal grey with subtle pinstripes, elegant but not flashy, professional but not cold. And around her neck, she still wore that simple silver necklace, the one that had started everything. "My name is Alicia Whitmore," she began, her voice steady and clear, amplified by microphones that carried her words to every corner of the room. 27 years ago, I was stolen from my family and left to die in a hospital bathroom. I survived through luck and the dedication of social workers who refused to let me become another statistic. But I shouldn't have had to survive. I should have been protected. I should have been safe. I should have been loved. The audience listened in rapt silence, hanging on every word. Some were crying openly. Others sat frozen, confronted with the reality of a system that had failed so completely. The foster care system is broken, Alicia continued. Not because of the people in it. Many social workers are heroes who fight tirelessly with inadequate resources, but because of the system itself. There aren't enough homes. There isn't enough money. There isn't enough oversight. Children disappear into the cracks, and nobody notices until it's too late. If it weren't for this necklace, for a moment of recognition in a restaurant, I would still be nobody. I would still be alone. How many other children are out there right now, living in situations that would break your heart, and nobody knows? Nobody cares? She laid out the foundation's plans in detail. New initiatives to recruit and support foster families. Partnerships with state agencies to improve oversight and reduce caseloads. Training programs for hospital staff to recognize and report signs of child trafficking or abandonment. A hotline for reporting suspected abuse or neglect. Scholarships for children aging out of foster care. Mental health services for traumatized children. A network of support that would catch children before they fell. We can't change the past, Alicia continued, her voice growing stronger. But we can shape the future. We can make sure no other child experiences what I did. No other grandmother spends decades searching for a grandchild who was stolen. No other family is destroyed by greed and cruelty. This is our promise. This is our mission. And we won't stop until every child in this country is safe, loved, and protected. The applause was thunderous, a standing ovation that lasted for minutes. But Alicia wasn't doing this for applause or recognition. She was doing it because she understood something that her grandmother had taught her in their months together. Power meant nothing if you didn't use it to help others. Wealth meant nothing if you hoarded it. Privilege came with responsibility. Victoria watched from the front row, tears streaming freely down her face. But these were different tears than the ones she had cried in that restaurant. Not tears of grief or rage or loss, but tears of pride and hope and love. Her granddaughter, the baby she had thought lost forever, had survived. More than survived, she had thrived. She had taken her pain and transformed it into purpose. And together, they were changing the world. The media coverage of the foundation was extensive and overwhelmingly positive. News outlets that had initially covered the story as tabloid fodder billionaire drama, rags to riches fairy tale, now wrote serious pieces about foster care reform and child protection. Politicians took notice, attended fundraisers, sponsored legislation. Donations poured in from across the country and around the world. Other wealthy families started their own initiatives, inspired by what the Whitmores were doing, competing to see who could make the biggest impact. But the most satisfying moments were the quiet ones. Like when Victoria and Alicia visited a foster care facility and saw children's faces light up when they announced new funding for activities and field trips. Like when they received letters from families who had been reunited because of the foundation's work, letters that Alicia kept in a special box and read whenever she needed motivation. Like when they sat together in Victoria's penthouse, looking through old photos of Rachel, and Alicia finally learned about the mother she never knew. "She would be so proud of you," Victoria said one evening, her voice thick with emotion as she handed Alicia another photo album. "Rachel always wanted to help people. She was studying to be a doctor when she got pregnant. She planned to continue after you were born. She had so many plans. She wanted to open a free clinic in underserved neighborhoods, wanted to provide healthcare to people who couldn't afford it. She had your compassion, your determination. I think that's why she kept you, even when I told her it would ruin her life. She knew what it meant to fight for someone who needed protection." Alicia squeezed her grandmother's hand. "Tell me more about her. Everything. I want to know everything." And Victoria did. She shared stories about Rachel's childhood, how she had rescued every stray animal in the neighborhood, how she had organized food drives at her private school, how she had gotten suspended for punching a boy who was bullying a younger student. She told her about Rachel's stubborn determination that never accepted no for an answer. Her infectious laugh that could light up a room. Her terrible cooking that had once set off every smoke detector in the penthouse. Her habit of falling asleep while reading, books scattered across her bed like a paper landscape. Victoria showed Alicia videos of Rachel's high school graduation, her college acceptance letters, her 20th birthday party where Victoria had given her the necklace. She shared text messages they had exchanged, emails Rachel had sent, journal entries she had kept. She made Rachel real, not just a tragedy or a ghost, but a person with hopes and dreams and flaws and fierce love. "I wasted so many years being angry," Victoria admitted one night as they sat on the balcony overlooking the city lights. "After Rachel died and you disappeared, I became hard, cold. I built walls around myself because I couldn't handle any more loss. I thought if I didn't let anyone close, I couldn't be hurt again. But those walls also kept out joy, connection, love. I was so busy protecting myself that I forgot how to live." "You're making up for it now," Alicia said gently, resting her head on her grandmother's shoulder. Victoria smiled through her tears. "We both are." The necklace that had started everything now hung in a place of honor in the foundation's headquarters, preserved in a glass case alongside Rachel's photo and the hospital blanket Alicia had been wrapped in when she was found. Underneath was a plaque that read, "In memory of Rachel Whitmore, and in celebration of every child who survives against impossible odds. May we never forget their worth." Alicia had a replica made that she wore every day, a reminder of where she came from and where she was going. It was identical to the original except for one small addition. On the back, next to the word forever, she had added an always, completing the promise her grandmother and mother had made to each other so many years ago. David, serving his sentence in a minimum security facility upstate, heard about the foundation through news reports that filtered into the prison. He wrote a letter to Alicia, pages and pages of apologies and self-justification, explaining his gambling addiction, his desperate circumstances, his decades of guilt. He begged for forgiveness, claimed he had changed, insisted he had thought the baby would be quickly found and adopted. Alicia read the letter once, folded it carefully, and filed it away without response. Some things couldn't be forgiven. Some actions had consequences that lasted forever. He would live with what he had done. She would live with what had been done to her. But she wouldn't let his choices define her future, and she wouldn't give him the absolution he sought. The other convicted conspirators faced their own reckonings. The accountant lost his license and all his assets, forced to work minimum wage jobs to pay restitution. The lawyer was disbarred and became a cautionary tale in legal ethics classes. The social worker never worked with children again, her name permanently added to registries that prevented her from any position of trust. They would spend their remaining years as examples of what happens when greed overpowers ethics, when personal gain matters more than protecting the innocent. But Alicia didn't dwell on them. She focused instead on the children she could help, the families she could reunite, the systems she could change. Every child placed in a loving home was a victory. Every policy reform was progress. Every dollar donated was another life potentially saved. Her nursing degree, when she finally completed it, included a specialization in pediatric care with a focus on trauma-informed treatment. She split her time between working at a children's hospital, where she had a reputation for being exceptionally patient with scared kids, and running the foundation. She brought the same compassion to both roles, understanding from personal experience what it meant to feel forgotten and alone. Victoria often joked that she had less energy than her granddaughter, despite being half a century older. "You got your work ethic from me," Victoria would say proudly, watching Alicia juggle hospital shifts, foundation meetings, and speaking engagements. "But your compassion? That's all Rachel." She would stay up all night nursing an injured bird back to health. She couldn't stand to see anything suffer. Lancaster Industries flourished under Victoria's continued leadership, but she began transitioning responsibilities to a management team she had carefully selected and mentored. She wanted time with Alicia, time to make up for the decades they had lost, time to simply be a grandmother rather than a CEO. She cut back on board meetings, delegated more authority, and prioritized family dinners over business dinners. They took trips together, making up for lost years with new memories. Paris, where Rachel had been conceived during a romantic vacation with Victoria's late husband. Tokyo, where Victoria had been attending a cosmetics convention when Rachel went into labor, when she had ignored that nagging feeling that something was wrong because the business meeting seemed too important to skip. Rome, London, Barcelona. All the places Victoria had traveled alone in her grief, she now visited with joy. And in every city, they looked for ways the foundation could expand. New partnerships with international organizations. New programs modeled on successful European foster care systems. New opportunities to protect vulnerable children wherever they were. The story of the Billionaire and the Waitress became something larger than just a reunion. It became a movement that swept across the country. Foster care reform became a priority issue in state legislatures from California to Maine. Hospital protocols were strengthened nationwide, with security measures that had once seemed paranoid becoming standard practice. Adoption processes were scrutinized and improved, with better background checks and follow-up procedures. And most importantly, people started paying attention to the children who had been invisible for so long. 3 years after that fateful day in the restaurant, Alicia stood once again at a podium, this time at the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C. But this time, she was introducing her grandmother, who was receiving a humanitarian award for the foundation's work. "She is the strongest person I know," Alicia said, her voice filled with emotion as she looked at Victoria seated behind her. She lost her daughter. She lost years with her grandchild. She could have let that destroy her. She could have spent the rest of her life bitter and angry. Instead, she channeled it into something beautiful, something powerful, something that will outlive both of us and help generations to come. "She taught me that trauma doesn't have to define you. That pain can be transformed into purpose. That love is stronger than loss." Victoria took the stage to thunderous applause, hundreds of people on their feet. She looked out at the audience, politicians, celebrities, advocates, families who had been helped by the foundation, then back at Alicia, and smiled with pure joy. "I learned something important," Victoria said into the microphone, her voice steady and clear. "Wealth means nothing if you're alone. Power means nothing if you don't use it for good. And family? Family is everything. I would give every penny I have, every asset, every business deal, every accomplishment, just to have those 27 years back with my granddaughter. But since I can't have that, I'll spend whatever time I have left making sure no other family suffers what we did. I'll fight for every child who needs someone to fight for them. And I'll do it in memory of my daughter Rachel, who believed that every life had value, that every person deserved dignity, that love was the most powerful force in the world." The speech was short but powerful, her words resonating through the hall. And when it ended, Victoria walked directly to Alicia and pulled her into a long hug, holding her as if she would never let go again. The photographers captured that moment, the billionaire and the former waitress, the grandmother and granddaughter, two women who had been torn apart by greed and reunited by a simple necklace. The image appeared on the covers of magazines, in newspapers around the world, becoming an iconic symbol of hope and justice. But it wasn't really chance that brought them together, was it? It was that necklace. That small piece of silver that Rachel had worn, that she had somehow managed to place around her baby's neck in those final moments before everything went dark, before the pain became too much, before she slipped away knowing her child had survived. That necklace had traveled through 27 years of foster homes and group facilities. It had survived being pawned or lost or stolen, though Alicia had been tempted many times when money was tight and food was scarce. It had hung around Alicia's neck like a beacon, like a promise, like a prayer. Waiting for the right moment. Waiting for Victoria to walk into a restaurant on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. Waiting to bring a family back together. 5 years after the reunion, the foundation had become one of the largest child welfare organizations in the country, with branches in 40 states and partnerships with agencies around the world. They had helped place over 5,000 children in permanent homes. They had trained thousands of social workers, foster parents, and hospital staff. They had successfully lobbied for legislation in 32 states that strengthened child protection laws and increased funding for foster care services. But perhaps most importantly, they had changed the conversation. Children in foster care were no longer invisible. Their stories were told, their needs were recognized, their voices were heard. And it all started because a grandmother refused to give up, because she recognized a necklace and demanded answers. Alicia eventually became the executive director of the foundation, bringing her nursing background and personal experience to every decision. Victoria remained chairman of the board but stepped back from day-to-day operations, content to advise and support rather than control. On the 10th anniversary of their reunion, they stood together at the grave of Rachel Whitmore in a cemetery overlooking the Hudson River. The headstone, which had once read only her name and dates, now included new words, "Beloved daughter and mother. Your love brought us home." "I wish you could have known her," Victoria said softly, placing flowers on the grave. "She would have been such a wonderful mother to you." "I do know her," Alicia replied, touching the necklace at her throat. "Through you, through the foundation, through every child we help. She's here with us. She always has been." And as they stood there in the fading afternoon light, 3 generations connected by love and loss and an unbreakable bond, Victoria felt something she hadn't felt in decades: peace. Justice may take time. It may require fighting against systems designed to hide the truth. It may demand sacrifice and persistence and unwavering faith. But in the end, truth always finds a way. And love never forgets. Love leaves traces, like a necklace passed from mother to daughter, like a grandmother's determination to find what was stolen, like a legacy that transforms pain into purpose and suffering into salvation. The story of Victoria and Alicia Whitmore proved that even after 27 years, even after seemingly impossible odds, families could be reunited and wrongs could be righted. Their foundation continues to operate today, a testament to the power of love, the importance of never giving up, and the truth that every child, every single child, deserves to be protected, valued, and loved. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to Tales by Shaldra for more incredible true-to-life stories that will restore your faith in humanity. Hit that like button if you believe in the power of never giving up and the strength of a grandmother's love. Comment below and tell us, have you ever experienced a moment of recognition that changed everything? Your story matters, and we'd love to hear it. Share this story with someone who needs to be reminded that justice can prevail, even against impossible odds. That truth always finds a way. And that love never forgets.